This video will contain spoilers, so if you've not finished the game yet or care about the story, then this is your warning to click off. Also, this is covering the version of the game with patch 3, so things are subject to change later. The first Forest game was one of the first games I bought on Steam. It was considered one of those must-have games everyone told you about when you first started PC gaming, and it was an example of an early access title done right. I personally loved the game, and whenever I found out a friend never played the game before,
Yeah, I haven't played the Forest before.
what the fuck? It was time to jump back in and play the whole game through with them so they can experience one of the best survival horror games to have come out recently. Wait, it's been 9 years? Okay, well, released recently. So when I saw that there was a sequel to the game announced with a neat trailer, the hype began to build, and when there was an official release date announced with another trailer, I was very eager to get back to killing cannibals and building bases to defend from them. Alright, a delay. That's fine. I'd rather than release the game when it's finished and prematurely. Well, if it means the game gets the polish it needs, then it's all good. Okay, well, it can't be that early access, can it? That's it? None of the story even made sense. I beat Sons of the Forest the day it released, and going completely blind in it took me around 7 hours to beat the game and do everything the game really has to offer right now. Not a bad length for an indie game, but half of those hours were just spent taking the game slow and trying not to rush it, and if I was to do another playthrough right now, I could probably do it in a couple hours. But let's actually talk about the game. First off with the graphics. The game is a definite upgrade in terms of graphics, with everything being overall more detailed, from the foliage to the textures to the shadows and lighting, and when looking at the world at certain angles, it can even look realistic. I never thought the original game really looked bad, but when you compare them side to side, you really see the age of the first game. Yeah, this looks pretty good. Yeah, never mind. There's a lot more vegetation in the world now too, which makes it feel more lively and even claustrophobic at times as you run through thick parts of the forest. The sound is vastly improved as well, and honestly, it's just better if I just show you. For a development team of only 15 people, it's amazing how well they did that it's on par with AAA titles. But graphics aren't what makes a game, it's the gameplay. Let's start out with the survival aspect of the game, as this is a survival horror game and the developers themselves said they wanted to make the ultimate survival horror simulator. Well, unfortunately, the survival aspect of the game is pretty lacking. The original game really worked around the fact that you didn't know what to expect, with the fear of the unknown having you tread carefully. You were vulnerable as you started with very little, and if you weren't cheesing the game by just restarting the world and respawning the items, you actually felt like you had to build a shelter and get situated before exploring more of the island and finding your son. Sons of the Forest throws that away, as now you immediately start with a map that conveniently has every single point of interest marked for you, completely removing any sense of mystery and adventure, as the game follows the same formula as the original, where you're supposed to jump in caves, get the key items you need, and progress through the story. Except now you just know exactly where to go, as there's nothing else in the world other than some burial sites you can stumble across that have items you most likely already have an abundance of. Half of the points of interest aren't even anything significant, but instead are just a stockpile of items that you spent time walking all the way to and now will have to walk back to your base, or to another point of interest, hoping it's not just another item dump. You might run into cannibals while going to another point of interest, but you can just outrun any enemies, so they're not really a threat. When you do get to the caves and explore them, they're way more linear than the original game, as the first game had a dynamic cave system with a lot of the caves interconnected, making them so you can end up getting lost in them, or enter the cave and end up just popping out from another side without having found anything of value, as you actually have to spend some time thinking where to go and what you've already explored. Instead, none of the caves are connected, so each one boils down to you enter it, continue walking forward until you get whatever special item is in there, and then you exit with no reason to ever return to the cave. To try and prevent you from just speedrunning the game, there's of course going to be enemies in the caves, and this is where you'll most likely be doing most of your combat. But again, if you just keep sprinting forward, you can just outrun the enemies and quickly be in and out of the caves thanks to how straightforward they are. Even if you take your time fighting the enemies, they should be pretty difficult still, right? Not really, because you have access to such a variety of weapons so quickly that you just bulldoze through them with the weapons you have available to you right at the start. My first playthrough, I had already found the stun baton and had gotten a gun within the first 10 minutes of playing since I just followed the markers. You also get pretty stocked up quickly with everything you'll need, and if you just continue diving into the caves and points of interest on the map, you never have a need to make a base since you can carry a ridiculous amount of stuff, and if you need to sleep, you can just pop a tent inside a cave and use that. But sleep can be considered optional too if you just keep chugging energy drinks and munching on energy bars. Even if you choose to ignore your hunger, thirst, and energy bars, the only penalty is a lowered stamina bar, and you can't die from starvation or dehydration. Now, I'm not saying that taking the game slow and actually making a base and surviving is bad, it just feels optional if you've already played the original game and know what to do. If you do take the game slow and want to try and just survive and make a base, the game has very much improved in the base building aspect. They completely reworked how building is done with the addition of custom crafting, making building more flexible and allowing you to build more complex bases and structures where you can just build a simple shack or do what I did and build this. Hey, I didn't say I was good at it. There's still prefabs you can use too if you don't want to go through the hassle of making your own abomination like mine. The custom crafting isn't only limited to building a shelter, as now you can build defensive walls this way as well. And you can use sticks to make things like fires and fences and a couple other things like an effigy, a trap, and a marker. Custom crafting is definitely a huge improvement from the first game, but the other buildings on the other hand feel very bare bones. The variety of items you can build for storage are reduced to only one variant, where in the original game you had small and large storage. Boats are completely gone from the game as well, and you can't make any more effigies other than the head one, and even that one is currently non-functional. There's only 2 traps that you can make here that actually defend from the cannibals, and even with the other stick trap included, you still have less than half the traps that the original game had, and they're much simpler. Not like you need it considering how abundant food and water is, but the selection of food and water buildings you can make is actually the same as the original. Though unreleased, there wasn't even a way to collect water, but they recently added the rain collector to the game. The only issue I had was with the planters only being able to have one thing planted at a time, which was pretty annoying considering how costly it is to make one, where in the first game, it was only a couple logs at most and allowed you to plant multiple things at once. Honestly, the building crafts can all be fixed quickly by at least adding back in the original things that were in the first game, and they've shown to be able to do that by adding back in the water collector, but for now, the variety feels pretty minimal. Now, one thing that really bothered me in the game is that the cold isn't lethal anymore. If you were too cold for too long in the first game, you eventually would begin taking damage, and in order to avoid that, you had to either get warmer clothing or use fire sources to warm you up. This mechanic made you have to seek proper shelter and prepare for the nights as the cold was a real threat. The worst thing that happens now, even if you're standing on the tallest mountain, is that your stamina is reduced, which doesn't matter much since it feels like you can already run forever with how slowly the stamina bar goes down. They even added seasons now to the game where the whole world can be covered in snow during the winter, and this would have been the perfect implementation of making the cold lethal and have you actually need to make a base and build yourself up first before diving into the caves, but instead it's just an inconvenience at most. One major addition to the game that was pretty hyped up was the new companions Kelvin and Virginia. Kelvin is available to you right when the game starts, and he's pretty helpful on certain things. His main use is as a grunt to do any of the menial base building tasks like chopping trees and clearing areas for resources, but when he's not doing that, he feels more like a liability, as even though he doesn't need to be given food or water since he gets it himself, he can't fend for himself against cannibals and can get swarmed easily. Okay, never mind, he's the best addition to the game. Virginia, on the other hand, does what he can, and that's being able to be given guns and kill the cannibals, but that's about it unless you count like the one berry she gives you randomly. They could definitely be expanded upon to make them more useful and do more than just one specific type of task, because whenever they're not doing that task, they feel pretty useless. If you ever find them to be too much of a nuisance though, you can just be a maniac and kill them both. Now that's about everything that needs to be mentioned about the survival portion of the game, but they said the ultimate survival horror game, so how is the horror? Sons of the Forest has the same main enemy as the original game, and that's the cannibals. These are supposed to be the fear-inducing Isle of Natives that make you fearful of jumping in the caves and wandering the wilderness, but in this game, they don't really feel scary. Their AI feels like it's been significantly improved upon, with them being able to do things like climb trees to stalk you and surprise attack you now, and now there's even different cannibal tribes that will fight one another, which is pretty cool to see, but they're just so quiet and lack a lot of those grunts and noises they made in the first game that they don't feel like rabid crazy cannibals trying to murder you. With this lack of noise coming from the cannibals, the nights don't feel that eerie, even if you might hear them yelp or make a noise at times. Same thing for the caves, it just feels like things are too quiet, and although you may expect them to be there, you don't feel that buildup of tension and atmosphere that the original game had. You gonna say something or? Oh, I guess you guys aren't into talking either. One thing that makes you never feel that fear is because you really do know what to expect in this game always, since the cannibals lack variety. They removed all of the big mutants from the original game, and instead it's just the same humanoid ones with a different skin put on them for whenever they belong to a different tribe. Yeah, there's some differing mutants which are new to the game, which are the twins and the fingers that you can find in caves mainly, but they don't differ too much from the humanoid body model, so they just feel like another variant to the normal cannibals and not like a whole new enemy type that felt challenging like the Armsy and the Cowman in the first game. There are some unique enemy types in the game already, but one of them doesn't even do anything and is just placed there for no reason other than to blow up. The other one only starts appearing at the very end of the game, and the other one I never even saw other than a dead one that you can find because apparently it takes like a month of in-game days to start spawning. If they would at least just add back in the old mutants from the first game, it'd feel more challenging and make the fights feel less predictable than just always expecting the same horde of cannibals coming for you and nothing else other than just the humanoid ones. Now, the biggest letdown the game has by far has to be the story. The story in this game feels so bare bones and confusing that once I beat the game, I had no clue what was even going on, and the final cutscene explains nothing and just has you going, what the hell even just happened, with even more questions left unanswered. Starting the game out, the only clear thing is that you're there to rescue the Puffton family, but then they have some random person that knocks you out that you barely find anything out about throughout the game, and never see them again until you get the most sudden and abrupt cutscene that comes out of nowhere and hear the only dialogue said in the game, which is 3 words from some random old guy that just gets killed right away. Apparently, Silver Jacket person is the bad guy, but you never find out what their intentions are, and in the final cutscene, I guess they die and become a mutant? You're in a cube with some dude tripping balls and you see the future or something? And then Helicopter, where the old guy actually didn't die, I guess. That's the whole story. You get to find some notes, clues, and hints throughout playing the game, but none of it really explains what was going on, who was behind everything, and who those people really were without making some big assumptions or stretches on what the actual story is. Sure, the first game wasn't straightforward either, but at least at the end of that game, you can piece everything together and figure out what was going on. But in this game, it leaves you with too much unanswered and not enough to go off of to get that same moment of realization at the end. I know some people will say, well, it's early access, so obviously it's not finished, but the game was only announced to be in early access like a couple weeks before release. So, that's where the game is now, considered very much so to be in early access. It isn't that the game is bad, it truly has a very solid foundation and a lot of potential, but currently it feels like it's lacking too much content to want to continue playing it. Fortunately, the developers have been showing that they're working hard on fixing a lot of the problems I mentioned the game has, and even while making this video, I had to go back and remove some critique I had because they had added things in to address those issues. They have a countdown on the home screen showing when a new significant update comes out, and so far everything has been promising in getting the game to where it should have been on release. In its current state though, I'd say give it a few more months and let them work on the game a bit more before diving into it. At least wait until they add the log sled pack, that thing definitely needs to return.